Aloha, everyone, and welcome back to the Ultimate Fashion History for this episode in our series, Speaking of Fashion. In Speaking of Fashion, we pick up the flotsam, jetsam, and ephemera of fashion history. And this time around, I'm really excited because we're going to be looking at a subject that's very close to my heart: fashion and the Tiki craze. And to borrow a little radio jargon, this one goes out to Tiki Bryan, host of the popular radio show Exotic Tiki Island. I'll tell you more about ETI Radio later in the video, but this is what I listen to when I put our UFH videos together. It's so relaxing. But before we can discuss how the Tiki craze influenced fashion, we have to know what the Tiki craze was, right? For those of you who may not be familiar with the Tiki craze, it was a moment in pop culture in the 1950s up until about the mid-1960s, when America in particular became absolutely obsessed with anything Polynesian. How did this craze start? Well, a few factors combined to make the Tiki craze happen. In 1947, Thor Heyerdahl embarked on his epic Kon-Tiki expedition. This heroic endeavor captured the imagination of everybody internationally. It sort of cut through the gloom of the post-war landscape. Heyerdahl brought out a best-selling book about his adventure, which he turned into a documentary feature film, which actually won the Oscar for Best Documentary. In 1948, James Michener published his Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, Tales of the South Pacific, which was turned into the Broadway musical South Pacific. Adding to all of that, American servicemen who had served in the South Pacific found themselves, by the time the 1950s rolled around, a little bit nostalgic about the war years. It may seem odd that anyone who had fought in such a devastating and terrifying war would feel nostalgic, but you only have to watch the 1946 Oscar-winning movie, The Best Years of Our Lives, and you understand that the time served was really a particular moment of adventure and heroism, and although it was heartbreaking, nothing in the suburban American landscape that these guys returned to could equal it. So there was certainly a nostalgia for at least the good times experienced during World War II. And add to all of that the fact that Hawaii gained its statehood in 1959, and voila, the Tiki craze. This preoccupation with Polynesia permeated nearly every aspect of American pop culture in the 50s and early 60s, although there had been hints of it prior to the war years even. Trader Vic's and Don the Beachcomber were operating in the pre-war era, and they were sort of the big kahunas. They were at the vanguard of the Tiki movement that was to come. By the 1950s, every town seemed to have its own little corner of paradise. Johnny's Tiki Hut, the Luau, Bali High. Often these tiki bars and restaurants were housed in these marvelous A-frame structures that were popping up along the American highway, very reminiscent of traditional Polynesian ceremonial huts. And of course, it was here that the buttoned-up Cold War suburbanite could imbibe on these fabulous, exotic, tropical drinks with evocative and sexy names served by scantily clad wahinis. And remember, the 1950s and early 60s was a very uptight and conservative time, so being served a flaming volcano bowl served by a girl dressed like this, wow, that was hot stuff. But make no mistake, authenticity did not enter into any of this. Take a look at this. Shelter Island's Bali High, exotic Cantonese food, Polynesian dance floor. Cantonese food? Polynesian? It was all this marvelous melange of anachronisms. It didn't matter if it was authentic. You could take a little bit of Asia, a little bit of Polynesia, even a little of the Caribbean. The zombie, for example, was such a famous tiki drink, still is. Zombies don't come from Polynesia. They come from the Caribbean, don't they? But the tiki venue was where the buttoned-up, grey flannel suit Madison Avenue executive and his Donna Reed wannabe wife could let their hair down, imbibe in these tropical delights, and go a little native. And before too long, people wanted to bring this taste of the tropics into their own homes. So we see a slew of homeware, tiki mugs, hula glasses, chalkware hula heads. Every home had a little element of tropical fun. And it parlayed into music as well. Artists like Martin Denny and Les Baxter created a whole new genre of music known as Exotica, which is really orchestral light music but with tribal or exotic or jungle elements, parrots singing, monkeys chirping, this kind of thing. Great fun. It's the kind of music I listen to all the time, and the kind of music that Tiki Bryan plays on the wonderful Tiki Island Radio. In movies as well, of course. South Pacific, the movie version of the Broadway musical, is probably the most quintessential of Tiki movies, but up there, Blue Hawaii with Elvis Presley. Of course, From Here to Eternity was set in Hawaii, and I would argue that Mutiny on the Bounty also spoke a little to the Tiki craze. Where were Captain Bligh and Fletcher Christian off to? Well, they were going to Tahiti, weren't they, on their famous breadfruit run. Of course, these are all big box office famous movies, but you can find Tiki everywhere if you know where to look for it, even in B movies like this, Hell's Half Acre, which is a very good film noir actually. This is set in Honolulu. And what about this? She Gods of Shark Reef. I've never seen this, but look at the Tiki elements at play. On television too, we find Tiki. Hawaiian Eye at the beginning of the Tiki craze, Hawaii Five-0 at the end of it, and I would argue that Gilligan's Island kind of spoke to the Tiki vibe, didn't it? Tiki was everywhere, on greeting cards, in advertising. It's the era of the enchanted tiki room. In the jungle room, Elvis had a tiki bar. It's no wonder that this was the era of the hula hoop. Those of you who watch the UFH regularly will have heard me say many times that fashion is not an island, it's a response. And of course fashion was going to respond to the tiki craze. No surprise, we see a lot of Polynesian prints or just big tropical prints, palm leaves and hibiscus and things like that. But structurally, the garment that first appeared in the 1950s and continued until the early 1960s that best marks the tiki craze is, of course, the sarong dress. This one is by Alfred Shaheen, which we'll talk about a little later. Wonderful sarong dresses with the matching boleros. Take a look here. We have the halter neck sarong dress. Then look at the bolero on the left, the blue bolero. It has a mandarin collar. We see these elements of Asian fashion and indigenous style creeping in to the tiki craze and billed as tiki. But the sarong dress unto itself isn't Polynesian. Sarongs are from Indonesia. Polynesian pattern, the sarong dress. So already we're seeing a lot of mixed up melange, a lot of intentional anachronisms. But nothing could be more anachronistic than this. A lure from the land of aloha. Why? Look at this dress. There is nothing remotely Polynesian or even tropical about this dress. It has a paisley print. Paisleys come from India. The paisley is from India, although us fashion historians tend to associate the paisley print mostly with the Victorian era. There's a slight hint at a mandarin collar there, but there ain't nothing Polynesian or tiki about this, but all you had to do was put the word aloha on some advertising copy and you're all set. You are buying into and hopefully profiting from the tiki craze. In beauty and cosmetics too, I love this. Max Factor Pacific Sunset Tones. Maybe my all-time favorite piece of advertising copy. From east of the sun, west of the moon, where each tomorrow dawns, Pango peach, a many splendid coral. Well, a many splendid anything really ties in with the movie Love is a Many Splendid Thing, which was set in Asia, but continue reading the copy there. What a volcano of fashion color. Volcanoes we associate with Polynesia and Indonesia, so you see it is all just this marvelous mix of everything. And I think that's Susie Parker, the world's first supermodel. Not sure, think it might be. Of course, the Tiki craze also impacted menswear, most notably with the aloha shirt. Now, the history of the aloha shirt is a UFH video unto itself, but here are the basics. The first aloha shirts actually started appearing in the pre-war era, and the first, allegedly, was made by this gentleman, Ellery J. Chun. What he did, he took scraps of discarded Chinese silk and patchworked them together to make these wonderfully colorful, vivid, and rather flamboyant shirts that American servicemen stationed in Hawaii during World War II would take home with them. Then Musashi Shoten did something a little bit different. He took Japanese kimono fabric and created his own shirts. Now, these were terribly popular during World War II. He became so famous for these shirts that he actually earned the moniker the shirt maker. However, it was Alfred Shaheen who really gave the aloha shirt its Polynesian flavor, taking it away from Asian motifs by using Polynesian motifs. And here's Elvis in his Alfred Shaheen aloha shirt. The aloha shirt was so ubiquitous that even the President of the United States was seen wearing one on the cover of Life magazine. But as with all things Tiki, the aloha shirt really was a means for the grey flannel-suited Cold War suburbanite to let his hair down and go a little native. Yet the Tiki craze just fed into a much larger obsession of the American mid-century, travel. This was the golden age of air travel, and even if somebody couldn't afford to travel by air to an exotic locale, they could at the very least dream of it. Remember, Frank Sinatra invited us to come fly with him. I term all of this mid-century exoticism. This was the era of Tretyakov. It was the era of The King and I. Many movies were set in exotic locales like Love is a Many Splendid Thing and The World of Susie Wong, both of these movies actually spawning another fashion fad of the era. The Susie Wong dress, this tight wiggle dress with the mandarin collar. The Caribbean was not forgotten in this obsession with international exoticism. The Caribbean, of course, became popular as a craze unto itself, chiefly because of the Calypso moment. Harry Belafonte, of course, was the king of Calypso, but the prince was Robert Mitchum. Even Robert Mitchum brought out a Calypso album. Have you ever heard it? If you haven't, go listen to it. It's absolutely hilarious. There were movies that tied into the Calypso craze. Calypso Heatwave, Bop Girl Goes Calypso, and of course, Calypso homeware. Like these wonderful Gennaro, I don't know how to say that, Calypso figures. An awful lot of Calypso dancers, limbo dancers, Calypso glassware. You could have Tiki in your home, you'd have Calypso in your home. And of course, because fashion is not an island, not even a tropical one, we see in this era an awful lot of prints of Caribbean dancers, limbo dancers, that kind of thing. And look at these skirts with entire Caribbean carnivals at play. Even Brazil had its little moment in the early 1960s, chiefly due to the inauguration of Brasilia as the nation's new capital. This incredible modernist new city with all of this cool, googie architecture happening at the same time, of course, as Bossa Nova, this new, cool, hip, laid-back music that was coming out of Brazil. And, of course, The Girl from Ipanema was the elevator song of choice. It took no time at all for America to jump on the bossa nova craze. Edie Gourmet had a hit with Blame It on the Bossa Nova, as did Elvis with Bossa Nova Baby from the Paramount picture Fun in Acapulco. Acapulco is in Mexico. Bossa Nova comes from Brazil, but this is all illustrative of what a wonderful, anachronistic, fun era it was, where pop culture just took elements from every interesting and exotic locale throughout the globe and put them all together. I always warn my students not to start a business based on a craze, and I actually use the mid-century Tiki craze as an example because, of course, by the time we get to the late 1960s, everybody had lost interest in Polynesian escapism, and these beautiful buildings fell into terrible disarray. Hardly any of the original Tiki venues are still in operation, with one notable exception, my favorite place on earth, the Mai Kai in Fort Lauderdale. It's more than a tiki bar or restaurant. It's an entire tiki complex. Every time I hit Fort Lauderdale, I roll up to the Molokai bar at the Mai Kai. Isn't it fantastic? And have one of their signature Mai Tais, which I take as I stroll around the beautiful gardens. I absolutely love the Mai Kai. All of my siblings live in Florida, and when I can, I drag them to the Mai Kai. And there I am with Channing Tatum. No, that's not Channing Tatum. That's my brother Zach, after more than a couple of zombies. Over the past 20 years or so, there has been an enormous revival with tiki bars and tiki restaurants opening all over the world that pay beautiful homage to the original tiki escapism of the 1950s. One of my favorites is Three Dots and a Dash in Chicago. Every year there are tiki conventions like the Hukilau in Fort Lauderdale, hosted at the Mai Kai. A big one is Tiki Oasis in San Diego. In fact, in this year, 2017, Tiki Brian and Exotic Tiki Island Radio are doing a 4-day special broadcast in conjunction with Tiki Oasis. I don't often go to the Tiki conventions because they usually clash with summer school. However, here I am at the London Luau in, I think, 2007, winning first runner-up in the cocktail masterclass. I am very proud of that. Facebook is full of Tiki groups, like this one, Tiki for Everyone. I'm talking about this one because this is the Facebook group that I started with my friends Debbie and Mark, but there are tons of them. Serious collectors, aficionados, and just plain fans of Tiki flock to these groups. And of course, Tiki is back in fashion. The designers and boutiques and online retailers who cater to the Tiki craze. My favorite is without a doubt Vivian of Holloway in Great Britain, although they ship throughout the world because they do the best and most beautiful recreations of the original sarong dress. They even have their own Tiki mug. I'm not wearing Vivian of Holloway here, unfortunately, but even I try to bring a little bit of Tiki into my everyday wardrobe. And look at my Calypso guys behind me. They're my pride and joy. I know they're not Tiki, but hey, I like everything. If you want to learn more about Tiki, read this book, Tiki Pop by Sven Kirsten. Sven is sort of the godfather of Tiki knowledge. I believe this is his latest book, or one of his latest books. It's a beautiful, big, thick, glossy coffee table book with an awful lot of images that are absolutely great and an awful lot of knowledge that Tiki people need to know. And of course, listen to Exotic Tiki Island Radio. It's absolutely wonderful. I'll put the URL in the description of this video. It's absolutely brilliant. It takes you away completely. It's so well done. Well, now I'm going to kick back, pour myself a Mai Tai and listen to some Tiki Island Radio. You can contact me through my website, amandahalle.com. Join the Ultimate Fashion History Facebook group. We always have so much to talk about over there. I'm back every week with more episodes on the Ultimate Fashion History, 20th century style icons, speaking of fashion, fave film fashion, and sometimes just some good old-fashioned classroom fashion history. So just click the little circle to subscribe. And as always, mahalo for watching.